I'm going to briefly introduce you to our panelists who are going to now engage in an Oxford-style debate. They are debating a question of crucial significance. There's nothing idle about this topic. We're going to be talking about something that's wrapped up in the heart and soul of our sustainability issues. Some would say even the future of the planet. It's certainly at the heart and center of the work that Joint Venture is doing in the area of sustainability with our Silicon Valley communities. So the proposition is whether the combustion engine has a future in Silicon Valley. Let me introduce you to our debaters. Our first debater is Jackie Birdsall. Thank you, Jackie, for being a part of this today. She's a senior engineer at Toyota. Joining her is John Boesel, and he is the president and CEO of CALSTART. It's a national organization. John, thank you very much. Next, we have Mark Platshon, and he is a senior advisor at BMW. Mark, thank you.
Hello.
And then rounding out that team is Stefan Heck. Now, this is a change from your printed program. It was to have been Drew Baglino from Tesla. He, too, was called away this morning. He had an urgent matter, and so we had to reach out to find his replacement, and we were so fortunate to have Stefan. He's not just anybody, as you heard. He was our morning keynoter and highly steeped in these issues, and we think he'll be a terrific combatant. Now, we needed somebody superb to moderate this debate, and that is Jeffrey Ball. And just a word before I give it over to Jeffrey Ball. The debate was organized for us this morning by Stanford University and the Precourt Center for Energy Efficiency at Stanford, and we want to thank them for their instrumentality. We want to thank them for helping us reach out to these distinguished debaters. We appreciate that. Jeffrey Ball is affiliated with that institution, and I am now going to place the future of the planet in your hands, Jeffrey. Thank you. There it is, right there. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Hold on to your seats. This should be fun. So we have 50 minutes, and we're going to solve this question. And the first thing we're going to do is ask you to vote. So I'm told that you know how to do this. So pull out your phones and text your vote. And here is the question. And again, there's a negative in the question, so pay close attention to how this is worded. The internal combustion engine has no future in Silicon Valley. Yes, no. Okay? Oh, someone got funny on us, and now we have all these. Okay.
Oh my! That's not a yes no.
Supposed to be yes no.
That's the wrong measurement.
Wait a second. This is a different question. Can someone redo this as a yes no question?
Wow.
All right, we're gonna talk and assume someone can perform technical feats, and the question we're gonna ask you is: the internal combustion engine has no future in Silicon Valley? Yes, no. And if that can't happen, then we'll go with this.
We'll go with the shifted percentage.
We absolutely will. Okay. So let me just sort of frame this for a second. Just a couple of numbers. Those of you who checked the news this morning will know that oil closed yesterday at 26 a barrel, its lowest point in several years. It was up a little bit in early trading this morning on some statements from an OPEC minister. We'll see how that goes, but obviously oil is down. You can see the result of that in auto sales. So let me just give you a couple of statistics. New car sales in the United States reached a record in 2015, 17.5 million vehicles, up about 6% from the previous year. That's quite a year-to-year jump. What are the top-selling vehicles in the United States? Here's 1 through 10. The Ford F-Series pickup, the Chevy Silverado pickup, the Dodge Ram pickup, the Toyota Camry, Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, Nissan Altima, Toyota RAV4, Honda Accord, and Ford Fusion. Those all have something under the hood called an internal combustion engine. In January sales in the United States, electric drive vehicles, this is not just pure battery powered, but anything with an electric motor under the hood, including hybrids, conventional hybrids, and plug-in hybrids, collectively held a total of 2.5% of US new car sales. And I think I will leave it there, except to say one other thing, which is that electric vehicle sales were down in 2015 from the past couple of years. So in 2013, electric vehicle sales were 3.8% of all sales in the United States. They dropped a bit in 2014 to 3.5%. And in 2015, and I dare say this might be linked to the drop in oil prices, they dropped to 2.9%. So that is where we are. And we're going to jump in here and allow the debaters to have at it. So the first folks, okay, now we can ask this question. Can we do it? The internal combustion engine has no future in Silicon Valley. Yes, no, vote.
Oh, there we go.
True, false. Okay, yes.
All right, while this is happening, fascinating.
Wow.
Oh, less fascinating.
Wow.
All right, this is an establishment crowd. So the internal combustion engine has a bright future in Silicon Valley, essentially, according to nearly 3/4 of you. Stop voting. All right, Mark, tell us why the internal combustion engine has no future in Silicon Valley, and you have 2 minutes and not a second more.
Once upon a time, everyone used the gas ones. The gas ones had a huge infrastructure in place. There were scientists and engineers working on the electric ones. People had the electric ones. They didn't work very well. They didn't last very long. They were really expensive. They just didn't work. But they kept persevering. And then suddenly the material scientists had a material science breakthrough, and the electric ones were good enough. And in not much more than a decade, the entire gas infrastructure was ripped out, and electric infrastructure was put in, and almost 100% market share shifted in this great big population. What am I talking about? The light bulb, Thomas Edison, of course. And the first gigafactory was built to make millions and millions and millions of light bulbs, and light got cheap. Better, cheaper, more efficient, safer, cleaner, always wins. You once learned that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? Well, a gallon of gasoline weighs 6 pounds. If I feed that 6-pound gallon of gasoline to my combustion engine, what do I get? I get 20 pounds of waste. I get 20 pounds of carbon dioxide and other pollutants in the atmosphere. That's not equal and opposite. That's horrible. If you could see it, you would never embrace that technology. But it's invisible. So if you've ever driven a Tesla, you know, torque sells, driving is fun. Cars can be wonderful, but they need torque. Electric is the way the world's going to go, partly because it's safer, partly because it's cleaner, partly because it's just a better driving experience. If you believe the world's going to go electric, battery prices are getting cheaper very fast, you need to vote for this proposition. Thank you.
John Boesel, the internal combustion engine does not have no future in Silicon Valley. Tell us why.
I'm not sure how many negatives were in that one, Jeff. I'm the CEO of CALSTART. We're a national organization with offices here in California and elsewhere focused on the growth of the clean transportation technologies industry. It would really be in my best interest to argue for the other side. 4 of my member companies are based here in Silicon Valley. Tesla, 9,000 jobs in California, scaring the heck out of the established automakers. Motive, a startup in Fremont, wants to be the Cummins of electric drive in the medium and heavy-duty vehicle sector. Proterra is here now, developing new electric buses, helping to change the drivetrains for the medium and heavy-duty vehicle sector. And ChargePoint is the leading developer and supplier of electric vehicle charging equipment. And I think all those companies have a tremendously bright future. But just quickly, the reason why there is going to be a future for the internal combustion engine is that because of the innovations that those companies and others are driving, the internal combustion engine people are also innovating. So is the oil and gas industry. That's number one. Number two is low oil prices are having a negative impact on the electric drive sector. And people are changing, they're going back to bad old habits, buying bigger, more inefficient internal combustion vehicles. Third is that we, as much progress as we're making in the light-duty vehicle sector, there are still many other segments where the internal combustion engine is going to reign for quite some time, particularly when you look at the truck sector and in the non-road sector. And by the way, in a power outage, don't you want to have that backup generator be an internal combustion engine? Thank you.
Okay, Stefan, jump up there. The internal combustion engine, or sit, whatever, has no future in Silicon Valley.
John, thanks for making our case for these great companies pushing electric drive. Let me talk about two concerns that people always raise about why electric can't win. One is range, and the second is cost. On range, today, most electric cars have 100 miles range or a little bit less. Tesla's an exception at 230, 250 miles, depending which model you get. As you already heard this morning, the average daily amount of mileage people drive is 12 miles across the country. Here in Silicon Valley, a little bit higher than that. But with a 100-mile range, you can cover that, except that occasionally you're going to get very close to that limit. You have what's known as range anxiety. With a 200-mile range or a 300-mile range, you don't have that range anxiety. I have only had to plug into the supercharger with my Tesla when we went to LA and one other time. That's for an entire year of usage. The rest of the time, I never have to visit a gas station. I charge at home. So as batteries get higher in charge capacity and lower in cost, instead of having a $20,000 battery by the end of this decade, it'll be a $3,000 or $4,000 battery. That's the equivalent of a nice stereo system or a sunroof in your car. And on a per mile basis, even with today's low gas prices, you're talking about electric drivetrain costing you about half to a third of what an equivalent gasoline fuel vehicle would cost. So both in terms of cost and in terms of range, we are within a few years of having a broad range of cars affordable to the middle class. We're seeing 18 new vehicles come out over the course of the next year that will make electric vehicles of more than 100-mile range affordable at the $25,000, $30,000 price point. That's the tipping point, and we haven't even talked about the knock-on effect on the used value of cars, which is going to cause a crash in those many SUV models that Jeff rattled off. And lastly, I'll close with the fact that who cares about the pickup trucks in Silicon Valley? Because this is a market for SUVs and passenger cars, not what you buy in the Midwest. So yes, GM will keep selling pickup trucks in the Midwest, but we're going to go EV here.
Jackie, you want to rebut that?
A bit, maybe. So I am a senior engineer, but I'm a senior engineer on the Toyota fuel cell vehicle, the Mirai, which, similar to John, makes it a little difficult to argue on our side. But it was a really fun challenge to step out of my space and really look at what else we are doing across the industry and specifically in Silicon Valley. And I think a really key message is that we don't determine what it is that the customer wants, but we need to make available to them the options so that they can make that choice. And I've actually had, I've been lucky enough to be here for a few nights now, and another evening I was discussing with a woman the Toyota Mirai and all of the technological advancements we've made with it, and she really was adamant that although she enjoyed driving the vehicle, she really loved driving a manual. And I think that's similar to something that Jay Leno has preached, is the previous huge displacement of transportation, or the change in personal mobility, was from the horse to the internal combustion engine vehicle. And that never did away with the horses. People still kept their horses and they still use them for leisure activities. Similarly, I don't think that we will ever see a full displacement of internal combustion engine vehicles. And with that in mind, I actually went onto classiccars.com and found like 136 vehicles within 5 miles of us that we can go and purchase that are historical internal combustion engine vehicles that I'm not sure people would want to necessarily get rid of. Understanding that as a niche, I wanted to look at the prompt itself, which is the internal combustion engine has no future in Silicon Valley, which means any internal combustion engine. So if we step out of the passenger vehicle market, let's look at what other modes of transportation or even power generation we have in this area. And immediately I thought of NASA, I thought of the Air Force Base that we have here, and even just 4 miles from us right now, we have an airport that transported 9.3 million passengers last year using combustion. So please keep that in mind as we move forward with this debate, and I think it'll be a good time.
Excellent. Okay, so Mark and Stefan, let me pick on you. We've got a bunch of time here to pick on all of you guys. So the proposition here is the internal combustion engine has no future in Silicon Valley. The proposition is not electric vehicles will reach a larger share than they currently have. You've begun to make the case that electric vehicles will reach a larger share than they currently have, but I don't think you've anywhere made the case that they're going to knock off the internal combustion engine, either in cars or certainly in larger vehicles. So make that case. Tell us why the incumbent is going to be absolutely buried. And if you think that's a plausible case, be specific about when you think it's going to happen.
So again, we'll have affordable electric vehicles before this decade is out. Affordable meaning middle-class consumable vehicles, right? $25,000, $30,000 price point. The battery will be just a feature like your sunroof or like a nice stereo system.
And that's affordable, taking into account a $7,500 federal tax credit.
No, without.
Without. Okay.
That also assumes we get to that 150, 200-mile range where you stop really worrying about range for your everyday use. You heard me talk this morning about if you need a vehicle to go to Tahoe, there's going to be plenty of shared systems to actually meet that occasional need, which is like 5 times a year, right? The rest of the time you're not commuting a couple hundred miles, at least not if you're in this room in a good job. In addition to that, even with the low oil prices, and I think they will rise again, but they will never get back to the heights that they once were, given the declining demand already. We have reached peak oil in the U.S. already on the demand side, right? People worry a lot about the supply side, but actually the demand side is structurally shifted because the internal combustion engines have gotten more efficient and we're starting to shift drivetrains. So even in that reduced oil price world, it is still cheaper to drive an electric vehicle. It is still cleaner to drive an electric vehicle, even if in theory you were in Ohio and that electricity is generated by a coal plant, which obviously is not the case here in California. We've got a clean grid moving to even cleaner grid, and the emissions benefits that Mark touched upon will be even greater here for us. You see a lot of cities in Europe actually outright banning non-electric vehicles in downtown areas just for the health benefits, which we haven't.
Okay, but the proposition is internal combustion engines will have no future in Silicon Valley, not in the center of cities in Silicon Valley, and not that four-door passenger car internal combustion engines will have no future.
So there will be internal combustion engines in the overland long-haul trucks that happen to end in Silicon Valley, but
there will be.
There will be. There isn't really a good option right now for your, multi-ton semi. They could theoretically ultimately move to some sort of hydrogen fuel system or natural gas fuel system. Those are cheaper. But I'm talking about the bulk of cars in Silicon Valley, which right now are four-door passenger vehicles, not a lot of pickup trucks, right? Those will shift. And in particular, imagine a dynamic where an electric car is now the equivalent price or cheaper to buy, is definitely cheaper to operate. And I'm talking not 10% cheaper, but like a third to half the cost. So significant for most people. I pay about $20 per month to run my Tesla when I charge at home. $20 per month. I used to spend 3x that to 4x that on gasoline.
Yeah.
And that was for a plug-in hybrid that was already pretty efficient, right? So economically, it will make no sense to buy an internal combustion engine. We are now seeing the model variety come out because people don't buy drivetrains. People buy their favorite brand, they buy the interior, they buy the color of the car. So we need that diversity of models before really many people can shift to electric. We're on the cusp of seeing that now. I think there's 11 types of electric vehicles. Most of them are cars you've never heard of. There's really 3 or 4 popular models now. In 5 years, we're going to have dozens and dozens of models and choices. So
okay, I'm going to stop you there.
Your favorite brand.
Okay, so you guys jump in. Go ahead. I have a question for you, but it looks like you're chafing to say something.
Go for it.
Well, I really appreciate Stefan agreeing with us that certainly in the trucking sector, the internal combustion engine will be around for quite some time. Let me tell you about one of our projects that we're quite excited about was working with Caterpillar. The small R&D group there, we got them some California Energy Commission funding, and they developed hydraulic hybrid technology for an excavator. And that technology is actually being used to build the BART extension. It saves 50% in fuel economy because as the excavator moves from one side to another, it captures the energy, braking energy, through something called a hydraulic accumulator. So there's a hybrid system. It's not hybrid electric. It's hydraulic hybrid. So, but 50% fuel saving. So there's an example of where other technology can provide almost the same benefit as electric drive, but not be electric. And then also what we're seeing in California right now is about 50% of the EVs sold are plug-in hybrid electric. And people are getting incredible amounts of electric-only miles with those cars, but they don't have the range anxiety. So I think that's going to be a very popular model for quite some time. And it has an internal combustion engine.
So, Jackie, I want to ask you a question as a representative of one of the largest automotive makers in the world. Stefan rattled off criterion criteria in his view that suggest that electric vehicles are better. I spent 5 years as a reporter in Detroit, and one of the lessons from that was that people buy cars for reasons other than what happens on paper. There's a kind of an emotional attachment to a car. And so I'm wondering, let's accept Stefan's proposition that there will be a market increase in four-door vehicles in Silicon Valley that run on batteries rather than the IC engine. I realize this is a bit outside the proposition, but let's sort of give a little context here. Assume that for the purpose of argument and put that into the broader context of Toyota's operations around California, around the United States, around the world. If that were to happen in Silicon Valley, to what extent would that happen elsewhere?
That's actually a very interesting question and something that we've already internally kind of prepared for, in that we do hope that we see an increase in all electric vehicles, both battery and fuel cell. And not just for the sedans, but also for the SUVs and eventually for the larger, longer haul vehicles, that we have this portfolio approach for offering all kinds of solutions to our customers so that they can customize their experience and choose a vehicle that best fits their lifestyle. So how that works in Silicon Valley is this is a kind of early adopter area where the people here are environmentally conscious and they're looking to reduce their impact as they evaluate their personal mobility options. And when you spread that out to California, California is also an early adopter state. And what we do here in California generally is mimicked throughout the world, throughout the US and then throughout the world. So we do hope to see an increase in the share of battery electrics and hybrids and fuel cell vehicles in the overall market share of the vehicles. However, that does not fully replace the hybrids that include the internal combustion engine or the internal combustion engine, the solely internal combustion engine as well. Essentially, it's up to the customer, but we do see that this state is an indicator for the rest of the U.S. and for the rest of the world of things to come.
So does do Toyota's pro formas for the world, for its global business, envision a time in the world when there are no more internal combustion engines?
No.
No. What about for Silicon Valley?
Not even for Silicon Valley. We're continuously improving our engines, not only besides the obvious ones, direct injection, turbocharging, there's all these ways.
So these are all technologies to improve the efficiency of the internal combustion.
Of the internal combustion.
So when you, Mark, I'll let you jump in just one second. Let me just ask one more question. So what do you guys regard as a plausible number for the penetration of battery-powered vehicles in Silicon Valley or any geography approximating it? What you guys must have some opinion on this that's based on market research.
That is outside of my research. I am mainly my focus is in my cubicle within the Toyota Mirai fuel cell vehicle. But I can say that it's pretty easy to watch the trends that have already taken place. For example, the trend of introducing the Prius hybrid when we first introduced that, seeing it have a real slow ramp up to selling 1 million vehicles, and then suddenly we've sold 8 million within the last couple of years. So I think that we can see a similar trajectory where even as you get that huge increase in sales, you're still only a few percentage of the overall.
Right. That's an important point. Right. Okay, Mark.
Let me take the argument a little bit further. As Jackie said, there's a lot of innovation going on in Silicon Valley, and it's going to affect transportation and the automotive world. I call this Little Detroit now. And what's happening here? We have the Ubers and the Googles and the Teslas and the Apples and the NVIDIAs all working on autonomous cars. And it's going to be, just think about the buying process a few years down the road when you have the choice to buy a car that can't crash, a car that won't crash, a car that can take you comfortably to LA or wherever without driving, without falling asleep at the wheel, while you can be productive while you're commuting, maybe in traffic. And as we go towards an electric connected autonomous world, as we go to this sharing economy, that's a tipping point that takes us to electrification, not at the 2% or 10% level, but at the 90 or 95% level. There'll be a few vehicles, sort of hangers on, where somebody, Mazda came out and said they're not in favor of autonomous driving. Porsche said they're not either. But almost everybody else from Ferrari on down is.
Why does autonomous driving have to be no internal combustion engine?
It doesn't have to be, and in fact, some of the current Google autonomous cars are hybrids and they have an engine in them. But the controllability and the simplification just goes together. You want electric control of that drivetrain to have the kind of response times for platooning and close following. When we're talking about how you get more traffic on the highway, if you're dealing with the lags and leads of a gasoline engine drivetrain, you can't maintain those kind of following.
Okay, so what is the year by which no more internal combustion engines in the four-door segment in Silicon Valley are sold?
Can I
Please
respond to that? Listen, I would like that to be 2020, if that was possible. And if you look at just backing up from 2050, what we need to do for the U.S. to hit our climate targets, we need really rapid change. We're 5% of the world's population in the United States. We generate 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if you think of the atmosphere as the global commons, we're 20% of the problem, 5% of the population. That's immoral and irresponsible. And this country ought to be moving as fast as it can to do its share and on a per capita basis be generating no more than any other country. And we have an incredible standard of living here. We ought to be using that, our wealth, our intellect, the power of Silicon Valley to move to a future where we are sustainable and we're not creating the kind of damage that will come from climate change. So what we need to do is move a lot faster. But the problem is low oil prices right now. Secretary Schultz at Stanford, and I'm on an advisory committee with him, constantly talks about a carbon tax and dividend. Taxing carbon, taxing oil, getting the money back to the people. We need a price signal that will change behavior, and if we can get that, we'll see a lot faster action.
So I don't disagree, John, with your moral argument for electric vehicles, but I think that's not compelling to most people. I think what's compelling to most people, as Jeff, you already teed up, is people buy a brand they like, they buy an experience they like, they buy performance they like the car they like because they want to impress their neighbors, their spouse, their friends, right? And that's where I think Tesla has begun the game change that we're going to see over the next few years, which is driving an electric car is more fun. It's got better acceleration, it's got better safety, it's got much more flexibility in the internal layout, it's got much more passenger space. On the Tesla, you have two trunks, one in the front and one in the rear, because guess what? There isn't a big honking internal combustion engine taking up a bunch of room and a whole mechanical drivetrain you've got to deal with. So the electric drivetrain enables a bunch of features that consumers actually care about. Most people won't even know 10 years from now that their car is electric. It's just the car that they like. Yes, you've made a good argument that for an interim transition period, there'll still be some internal combustion engines hanging around to give you that range near term. But as batteries double in capacity and eventually triple in capacity, there won't be a need for that anymore. You can go here to LA already with 2 superchargings. That will drop to 1 supercharging before the end of the decade, and it'll go away by 2025. At that point, why do you need an internal combustion engine that's a couple extra thousand parts of things that need maintenance? Electric cars don't need maintenance, right? They need tire changes occasionally.
So Mark and Stefan, you guys are essentially arguing that to cite some of the numbers that I cited about the low penetration of electric cars now is essentially to be looking in the rearview mirror.
It's like citing low penetration of TVs in the 1940s.
Got it. So this is the question. Is the question I want to ask you. So, give us a little bit of perspective. Your view, either of you, is that the auto industry now, in terms of the transition from the internal combustion engine to something else, is like what industry when, which supports your argument that it's about to shift massively?
So you look at any technology that's now common in the household, they all follow an S-curve shaped path, right? They teeter along for 10 or 15 years while there's low adoption and a premium segment or a niche segment begins to play with.
Like the Tesla.
Right, microwaves, most people don't realize, were invented in the 1940s, right? They became popular in the 70s because they invented in the 40s as a restaurant fast cooking device, which obviously is a niche market by definition. They were also the size of your living room, so it wouldn't have been convenient to bring one home. So whether it's TVs, cell phones, computers, microwaves, other home appliances, other business devices, fax machines, they all have that same.
Right, and I get that, but so what?
The question is, what is that inflection
correct,
point?
that's right. And so what makes you think that we're there or near there?
Yes, and so I think we now have proof that they lead to better performance, right? Everybody who's been in a Tesla agrees that's a cool car, got the best safety rating. It's top rated by traditional Detroit car magazines.
Should be for $100 grand.
Right? That tells you something.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So you bring up the second point is it's got to be affordable. The electric car that's affordable today has some real limits, has some range limits, isn't really sexy and high performance, right? People who buy the Prius love it because it's environmental, not because it's a great sports car, right? When the moment we release that constraint and get that 200-mile range and get the Tesla-like acceleration into a $30,000 car, that's that inflection point. And that's what I'm arguing is a year to 2 years away for the beginning of that.
Okay.
Then we need the range of model choices because not everybody wants to buy the black Ford Model T, right? We want variety.
Okay, so John or Jackie, why are we not at the inflection point of the yes?
Well, then, Jackie, feel free to chime in. But I would love to completely agree with Stefan. I think he's making some really good points. But the difference between the automobile and the horses is that there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to innovate with the horses. They were kind of there. And
Talk to a horse breeder.
okay, on the margin. But you look at what Stefan and I were at a conference recently. A lot of the oil and gas guys were there. It's phenomenal what the shale oil people are doing. How much production in the U.S. we've increased production by 4 million barrels a day over the last 5 years. So we're not at that point of peak production in the U.S., but that's all innovation. They didn't think they could survive at less than $60 a barrel. They're now surviving at $30 a barrel. They're cutting their work crews. They're using remote technology to monitor their wells. They're innovating. The car guys, the internal combustion engine car guys are innovating. They're going to make those plug-in hybrids even better and better. Toyota keeps doing a better job each time coming out with a better hybrid, not even plug-in, just the Prius. Each time it comes out much better. So that's the thing that, where I just don't think it's going to happen overnight like that because that other side is not staying steady. They're innovating like heck.
So you want to jump in, Jackie?
No, that was exactly my point. I don't want to limit
even
the innovation only to
Mark, you wanna
the
jump
battery
in?
electric.
I mean, even if you look at the cost of operations, the amazing thing is we've watched solar, just thinking about the grid that can then run electric cars, it's getting cheaper fast, and batteries are getting cheaper fast. The recent PPAs, the power purchase agreements, are at below 5 cents a kilowatt hour.
For solar, we're talking about now.
For solar. So if you're building new power plants, even just on cost basis, you're building solar rather than combined natural gas.
And what does that have to do with electric cars or the internal combustion engine?
As you get a cheaper grid and a prevalent distribution system, then people are rational choices at some point. And they'll say, hey, I can buy this car for the same price. I can pay 1/4 as much per month in fueling. I can drive all I want. A future of plenty, not of restriction, is what we want. It just needs to be clean and cheap.
Okay, so let me be impolite again. I think there's an argument to be made that we've seen this movie before. California has a long and illustrious history in trying to birth technologies, automotive technologies that displace the incumbent automotive technology. So there was methanol, and again, that is an internal combustion engine, but a different fluid in the internal combustion engine. There was methanol that was going to rock the world, and it didn't. There was natural gas that was going to rock the world under the hood, and it didn't. And now there was hydrogen, and it didn't, although maybe it will, you'll tell us. And now there are electric cars. So why should we believe this story? What's different this time?
So look at the microeconomics, right? Methanol, basically from a carbon point of view, was net neutral or even net negative if you're making it on corn. Right?
In other words, it caused more of a carbon problem.
It cost
than it
more,
solved.
and it didn't really have any environmental benefit.
Methanol.
Right? And it made trouble for your engines, right? We had to actually adopt engines to be able to run it.
Yep.
Then look at natural gas. If you're driving hundreds of thousands of miles and you're in the long haul truck business, they are interested in changing to natural gas. So are some of the big delivery fleets that really cover a lot of miles because it is cheaper than gasoline. So you're seeing adoption there. You also see very high adoption in places like Pakistan that have the natural gas infrastructure because people use it for heating and cooking and everything else. So you have seen examples where that has worked. It doesn't work well in the US because we have a power grid that goes everywhere. We don't actually have natural gas fueling stations everywhere, right? It's sort of like diesel, which never became very
So you're
popular.
saying that the infrastructure actually helps electric vehicles in a way that the infrastructure does not help
Because we
others.
have Edison's infrastructure from 100 years. You can plug in anywhere,
Okay.
right? Every house, every office building already
And
has
is there
it now.
another reason that EVs are different beyond the infrastructure, or is that it?
So the next is what Mark mentioned, which is on natural gas, yes, we've seen a cost reduction, but we're not on a Moore's Law type curve that continues to improve. With electric vehicles, both with batteries and with the solar cells that power them, ultimately power into the grid, both of those are on continued Moore's Law type curve. Solar panels, 18%, batteries is about 8-9%.
Okay.
So they are going to keep getting better, and we haven't seen the end of that, right? You've got silicon electrodes coming in. You've got different ways of manufacturing. The Gigafactory gets us to scale now in a different way, right? We're going to have different form factors.
So the Gigafactory is Tesla's Gigafactory for batteries, right?
batteries,
A very large
right.
factory to build batteries.
So we're seeing all of these levers of better materials, larger scale, less material being used in the manufacturing, the ability to recycle some of the components, and then new chemistries, right? Right now, we have a chemistry where, yes, we have lithium, but we're actually using a heavy material for the electrodes. Over time, it's going to go to lithium air, where the other side is air, right?
Okay,
that's
so
much
let
lighter.
these guys jump in. So the argument is that there's an infrastructure for electric vehicles, for electricity that's going to make electric vehicles fly, figuratively speaking, and there's a technological curve that far outpaces anything we've seen before with other disruptive technologies. Why is that wrong?
Sure. Well, I guess my argument back to that is that we similarly also have the gasoline infrastructure in place. As I said earlier, I didn't want to limit the innovation to just the all-electric to the battery electrics or even the fuel cell electric, and this actually goes against everything I believe for in our team. As we're constantly competing against our IC brethren, they are innovating at a substantial pace, where suddenly we are improving our fuel economy to meet with the CAFE targets and even beyond. We're coming up with new innovative techniques on how to actually burn the fuel and propel the vehicle without using pistons. So I wouldn't limit it to just being innovation in the battery area and working with the electric infrastructure. We need to look at the gasoline infrastructure, which is such a high energy density. It's untouchable as a fuel when it comes to ease of moving and volumetric and energy density. There's a lot to be said there, and if we're also looking at price, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you're on, the cost of oil right now is certainly in favor of continuing to use the internal combustion engine. So if we're talking about cheaper and performance, then I would argue that our fuel economy and our performance of our internal combustion engine vehicles, whether used in a hybrid or not used a hybrid, both offer what the customer is looking for.
So the other side, Jackie.
Let me understand this, Jackie. You're saying gasoline's easier to move. I have to go to a gas station a couple times a week. I have to stand there with the smelly pump to put the gas in, and then I'm wasting 99% of what I've just pumped in at $3 a gallon. How's that easier than flipping a switch or plugging in at home?
I think 99% is a little aggressive on what your losses are on that one. But I am saying it could be easier to one person. It could be easier to another.
Okay.
It completely depends on the customer. We are not the ones that tell them that. What I am saying is that it is easy to some people. It is easier for other people to plug in at home. It depends on if you have a home where you can plug in, or options to plug in at work, or an apartment complex that allows you to plug in. If not, it may make more sense or work with your current schedule to swing by the gas station that's on the way to work and spend 5 minutes refilling there to continue to propel yourself the next 300, 400 miles, depending on your vehicle.
So my daughter loves gas stations because she likes the car wash. How many of you love gas stations?
And the peanuts. I like the hot and spicy peanuts. Yeah. So there has been a chicken and egg dichotomy that has bedeviled attempts to disrupt technologies in the automotive sector for a long time. And it is this question of who moves first the automakers, or the fuel suppliers. And there, it seems to me, is kind of structurally a potential for a similar dynamic here. So let me first ask you guys to make the case that that is not a concern. That in fact that the infrastructure will shift in a massive way, and there will be no dilemma there. Mark, you want to jump in?
It's an interesting challenge. I think we're at a place where right now the auto companies are the legacy player, and we have representatives here who understand why they're thinking the way they're thinking. But I think the forcing function to convert to electric may not come internal to the legacy industry. It's going to come from the new players, what I call the NKOTBs, the new kids on the block.
It kind of rolls off the tongue, the NKOTBs, right? Yeah.
And the new players are not going to go try to compete with the legacy players in the same playing field. They're going to create a new playing field. Just as Uber's creating a new playing field that's worth far more than any one auto company.
And what does that mean for the new players? What's the field on which they'll play?
The new players will play on safer cars, more flexible designs, different kinds of designs, delivery vehicles, shared use vehicles, electric vehicles, and they're going to force everyone. What people expect is going to be dictated by the new players. When there's an Apple store that's got an amazing vehicle in it, or a Tesla store that's got an amazing vehicle in it, it's going to set a different expectation, and the kids who don't even want a driver's license right now are going to gravitate to that cell phone on wheels.
Is infrastructure, though, at all an impediment to the kind of unfettered growth of electric cars that you guys are proposing?
What do you mean, Jeff? We have roads everywhere and we have plugs everywhere.
Right, so, but we don't, okay, if the car can plug into an existing plug, that works.
Yeah.
But Jackie's talking about home stations for electric cars, which are different, and every home doesn't have a special plug station. So are you envisioning that in the revolution that you're talking about, cars plug into normal wall sockets and that's how it works?
So you talked about how either the infrastructure or the automakers have to.
Yeah, right.
And in the case of hydrogen or natural gas, yes, we need new infrastructure that doesn't exist. In the case of electricity, the base infrastructure is already built. Our utilities, because they're conservative too, arguably even more so than the automakers, have convinced us that, oh, you need this special charger and you need to upgrade and you have to pay thousands of dollars. The reality is you've got 100 amps or 200 amp service coming into your home. To charge an EV, you need 40 amps. So as long as I have a small control box, which is the digital device that's very cheap, I can actually decide when my electric vehicle charges. If it charges overnight while the rest of the house is not consuming most of those 100 amps, I have the existing infrastructure. I just need to charge intelligently so that I don't charge on top of running my electric stove and running my air conditioner and so forth, right? That's a very, very minor upgrade compared to actually building pipelines or building gas stations or building anything that requires lots of money. Now, there are places, as Jackie alluded to, if you're in an apartment building, if you're in an office where it's not your decision, it's your employer's or the landlord's decision, so that we have to have some legal change to allow you to be able to retrofit that in those cases where you don't own the building. But for private residents with your own garage, there is no infrastructure problem today. Right?
Okay, John?
So 50% of Californians live in apartments, multi-unit dwellings. So that is proving to be the toughest nut to crack in terms of putting in electric vehicle charging. So that is a bit of a challenge. We need to figure out strategies to get there. One of the key things we can really do is to get employers to put in charging at the workplace. I'd like to see this be as basic requirement or benefit as coffee, healthcare, and others. But I think if employers, and we got a lot of them in this room, and CALSTART has a workplace charging program, happy to talk to you about it. If employers can really embrace this and start putting in charging, you'll be doing a lot to move this industry forward. And the other really good thing about workplace charging is that it turns the workplace into a bit of a second showroom. people see their colleagues coming to work, plugging in, they start asking them questions, and almost at every location, ChargePoint and other companies report follow-on sales at the workplace. They put in more charge.
And John, in 5 seconds, if that happens, will internal combustion engines be obsolete in Silicon Valley?
We still need those backup power generators when the power goes out. We still got trucks, and we still got
All right.
off-road vehicles.
We're out of
that are
time,
a challenge.
so now you guys got to wrap it up. You each have 90 seconds. Which of you is going to go first? Okay, go.
Oh boy. Better, faster, cheaper always wins. Consumers are rational. Consumers love their cars. They want the best driving experience they can get. Employers are putting it in. That's going to take over the consumer side. But we talked about trucks, and delivery trucks, you see them all over the place, sitting there rattling and noisy. They're polluting in our cities, and they're going 25 miles a day. The post office vehicles are going 15 miles a day. And we know where they sleep at night. They can charge at night. So you're going to see all the service vehicles, all the delivery vehicles, all the delivery vans, all the service vans, all converted. And that's going to teach consumers, hey, this is possible. I want that. And so you're going to see, the backup charging generator is not the problem. The proposition here is, will primary personal transportation go electric? And the answer clearly is yes.
Excellent. Which of you is first?
I'll go first.
Go.
You know, if the proposition was something along the lines of, will the internal combustion engine have a limited and declining future in Silicon Valley, I might have a hard time disagreeing with that one and would probably support it. Unfortunately for our opponents, it's a pretty black and white statement. However, I want to totally support everything that they're saying about the improvement in the electric drive vehicles. We are on the verge of a tremendous opportunity, a revolution. When we see in 2017, the new standard will be an electric car with a 200-mile range on a single charge, $30,000 after federal tax credit. That'll be the new normal. I think it'll be much more affordable. I wonder if people in this room will develop an attitude around the Tesla vehicle, maybe an Apple vehicle, like the people in Michigan have. Will you only be driving American? Will you only be driving Silicon Valley? Will people in this room commit to really buying those cars and taking the right steps and moving forward into that future? I think there's going to be a great opportunity. I'm waiting for the Tesla Model 3 to buy my next electric car. I'm very excited about it. But the last thing I just want to conclude is these low oil prices are really pretty serious. And if we're going to hit our objectives on climate change and really drive the kind of ACES future that Stefan was talking about this morning,
3 seconds.
we really need a price signal, and we need the political will to implement it.
Stefan?
So I think you've conceded the argument that the internal combustion engine is relegated to supporting role in the vehicle. How long is that going to last? As the range exceeds, as the electricity prices continue to come down, and most importantly, think about this, more and more vehicles are going to be operated by shared fleets, right? As you get into shared systems, the fleets are going to make a total cost of ownership buying decision. So the fact that per mile electricity is cheaper today will sway their demand. And the fleets, instead of buying big SUV Escalade vehicles, are now going to be buying electric vehicles. On top of that, think about the fact that most of our vehicles today are financed. That depends on the resale value of that vehicle at the end of the lease. What if the market for the primary vehicle sales starts to tip? That residual value is going to drop dramatically, and the lease on the internal combustion engine vehicles is going to skyrocket. At that point, who will be buying internal combustion vehicles? So we're not arguing the full effect takes place in 5 years. We're saying the first vehicles are affordable, cheaper, better, higher performance, sexier, more attractive over the next 5 years. And we're arguing that 10, 15 years from now, nobody will want to buy a new internal combustion engine vehicle as their primary vehicle. That doesn't mean there aren't horses and old gas guzzlers in some of the garages in Los Altos Hills. It just means that's not how you're going to get to work anymore.
Okay, why is that wrong, Jackie?
Well, to use Mark's tagline now, I guess, what is it? Better, faster, cheaper always wins? But the customer is the one that determines what that is. And we are not the ones that will tell them what they need to buy or not buy. So in our opinion, that is to offer a multitude of different options for them to determine what is better for them. And that does include the internal combustion engine, especially here in Silicon Valley. I'd also like to ask the audience not to limit themselves to just looking at the internal combustion engine as it's used to propel personal mobility and light-duty vehicles, but look at all the other applications of internal combustion engines in Silicon Valley, and imagine how we could get away from them in the future. And it's pretty difficult to imagine that we could continue to move the massive amount of people that fly into or out of, or take trains into or out of Silicon Valley without having some form of internal combustion.
So, pull out your phones again. You were a pretty conservative audience before. Let me just remind you that the numbers, at least as I wrote them down, were 29% of you agreed with the proposition that the internal combustion engine has no future in Silicon Valley. 71% of you disagreed with that.
It's a tight race.
Wow.
Okay, stop.
Wow. Wow.
I can't tell where it stops. It's like the bouncing ball.
There might be some hanging chads.
Are you serious? This whole thing's going to be a tie.
I tell you, people don't adopt electric vehicles until they experience them. So until you sit in one, it's not going to happen.
Just a
No
question.
more,
how
no
many
more, no more, no more debating. It's over. 32.
I do recommend getting behind the wheel and trying one. It can change your view. It's very positive.
All right, well, it looks like you guys won. You convinced more people.
By a narrow margin.
Wow, close.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you
Thank
guys
you.
very much. Excellent.